Before the battle that would give him Rome, an emperor ordered a strange heavenly sign marked onto his soldiers' shields. He won, and from that victory forward, the Christian God became bound to his claim to rule. But victory can't tell us whether that choice came from belief, from politics, or from a Roman emperor's search for divine favor, or some changing mix of all three. So why did Constantine increasingly choose, protect, and favor Christianity? And what can the evidence actually tell us about his beliefs and motives? Constantine's army was advancing toward Rome, where Maxentius waited behind the Tiber and the walls of the capital. The two men were rivals for the Western Empire. Maxentius held the city itself and the prestige that came with it. Constantine had marched down from Gaul, crossed the Alps, and defeated every force sent to stop him. On October 28, 312, the armies met near the Milvian Bridge. Behind Maxentius lay the river. Ahead of him stood the challenger who had come to take Rome. Then came the order to mark the shields. The sign did not win the battle by itself. Soldiers still had to hold formation, attack, and survive. But when Maxentius's line broke toward the Tiber, the retreat became a disaster. Maxentius drowned. Constantine entered the capital as its master. For a Roman emperor, victory carried religious meaning. It could reveal which ruler possessed divine favor. Constantine's Christian supporters remembered the result as deliverance. A persecuting tyrant cast down, a favored emperor raised up, and the God invoked before battle vindicated in victory. That interpretation gave his rule a sacred claim. Yet the victory raises the very question it appears to answer. A Roman ruler could seek a god's help from devotion, from calculation, from inherited custom, or from all three at once. And the farther we move from the battlefield, the less the famous story resembles one clear, unchanging account. Here the sources divide. 2 years before the battle, a court orator praised Constantine for a divine encounter connected with Apollo and victory. The speech was delivered in 310, inside the public religious language of Roman power. It cannot tell us what Constantine privately believed. It does show that heavenly favor surrounded his claim to rule before any Christian writer described the sign at Rome. The earliest surviving Christian account comes from Lactantius, writing only a few years after the battle. His story is restrained compared with the version most people know. Constantine receives a command in a dream. He is told to mark a heavenly sign of God on his soldiers' shields and then join battle. No blazing cross above the midday sun, no speech to an assembled army, no detailed construction of the imperial standard, later called the Labarum. Eusebius also wrote about Constantine's victory in his ecclesiastical history. He presents the emperor praying and receiving divine help. Maxentius falls like Pharaoh at the sea. But in this earlier telling, Eusebius says nothing about a sky vision, a dream, or marked shields. Only much later, in the life of Constantine, does Eusebius tell the fullest story. Constantine sees a luminous cross above the sun, with words promising conquest. That night, Christ appears in a dream and commands him to make a standard in the form of the sign. Eusebius says Constantine himself later confirmed the account with an oath. That is powerful testimony. It is also late testimony, written after Constantine's death by an admirer presenting the emperor's life as a work of providence. So the evidence does not permit a simple verdict. It does not justify merging every detail into one seamless miracle. It also does not justify saying the whole episode was invented after Constantine died. Lactantius had already tied a divine command, a heavenly sign, and the soldiers' shields to that battle. What changed was the form and scale of the memory. If the texts cannot show us one fixed vision, perhaps the objects Constantine placed before the public can show how he wanted victory understood. 3 years after the battle, Rome dedicated an enormous triumphal arch to Constantine. Its inscription credits his victory to the prompting of the divinity and to the greatness of his own mind. The language is religious but broad. The monument does not name Christ. Its reliefs borrow heavily from earlier emperors, wrapping Constantine in the inherited visual language of Roman rule. His coins tell a similarly untidy story. Images of Sol, the unconquered sun, continued after the Milvian Bridge. They did not vanish the morning after a Christian conversion. At the same time, Christian signs began entering Constantinian public media. The transition was real. It was not clean enough to satisfy a modern before and after chart. That has often been used against him. If he still displayed Sol, the argument runs, his Christian commitment must have been false. But Roman emperors did not rebuild public religion in a single day. Coins had audiences, mints, and political purposes. The arch celebrated victory in language broad enough for a capital still crowded with traditional cults. Continuity can reveal caution, habit, and the Roman practice of accumulating divine associations. It cannot, by itself, read an emperor's heart. The opposite mistake is just as easy. The first Christian sign on a helmet, a shield, or a coin does not prove that every older allegiance had disappeared. The public imagery leaves us in transition. Constantine's actions are harder to dismiss. After 312, he began directing imperial money, legal protection, and status toward Christian communities. Those choices did not stay hidden inside symbols. They appeared in letters, property orders, tax privileges, and buildings. The question was no longer only which god had granted victory. It was what the victor would now do for that god's church. The familiar phrase is the Edict of Milan. It sounds like one document signed by one emperor, making Christianity legal overnight. The history is more revealing. In 311, while the Great Persecution was collapsing, the Emperor Galerius issued an order of toleration. Christians could gather again, provided they prayed for the welfare of the empire. It was a dramatic reversal from a ruler who had helped drive the persecution, but it did not repair every loss. In 313, Constantine and his eastern colleague Licinius agreed on a broader settlement. The versions preserved by Lactantius and Eusebius granted freedom of worship and ordered confiscated Christian property returned, even when the present holder had bought it in good faith and expected compensation from the state. This was not the establishment of Christianity as Rome's official religion. Traditional cults remained legal, and Constantine did not act alone. Behind that settlement stood an old Roman assumption. Public peace depended on right relations with the divine, the pax deorum, or peace with the gods. Constantine did not discard that logic. He increasingly redirected it toward the Christian God. But he moved beyond neutrality. He wrote to officials on behalf of Christian communities. He directed money towards Cecilian, Bishop of Carthage, and other clergy under his authority. He granted privileges and exemptions. In Rome, imperial patronage helped give Christians monumental places of worship, including the Lateran complex, and in time, the great basilica raised over the site associated with the Apostle Peter. The scale mattered. Christians had owned property and built churches before Constantine. Now the resources of the imperial household stood behind selected bishops, buildings, and legal claims. Why Christianity? Political advantage was part of the world Constantine ruled. A growing, organized church could cross cities, provinces, and social ranks. Supporting it could build loyalty and attach religious gratitude to the emperor. Yet in 313, Christians were still a minority, not an obvious majority capable of delivering the empire. Favoring them also created disputes, obligations, and resistance. The policy makes best sense when political usefulness and religious conviction are allowed to reinforce each other. Constantine believed victory had revealed divine support. He then acted as though the Christian God's people deserved restoration and favor. But imperial money carried an imperial expectation. The church, receiving protection, would soon discover that its protector intended to help decide what Christian unity required. The warning appeared almost immediately in North Africa. Christians there were divided over bishops accused of compromising during persecution. One side appealed to Constantine. The emperor, who had only recently protected church property, now found Christian rivals asking imperial power to judge Christian legitimacy. He referred the dispute to bishops meeting in Rome. When that did not settle it, another council met at Arles in 314. Constantine urged unity, received petitions, rejected appeals, and eventually backed coercive measures against the Donatists. The sequence matters. He did not begin with a plan to control every church. Christian appeals drew him in. But once involved, he treated division as more than a theological wound. Religious unity served the peace of the empire, and an emperor responsible for public order expected his decisions to be obeyed. Protection had changed the balance. Bishops could seek money, enforcement, and access from the throne. The throne could now demand settlement in return. The same mixture appears in Constantine's legislation. In 321, he ordered judges, city people, and workshops to rest on the venerable day of the sun, while allowing farm work when delay might ruin the season. Christians heard their weekly day of worship. Roman subjects heard familiar solar language. Was that pagan camouflage, Christian legislation, or a policy designed to speak across both worlds? The law does not settle the question. It shows how Constantine governed. Christian preference expressed through forms a Roman population could recognize. After he defeated Licinius and became sole ruler in 324, the Christian direction became harder to miss. So did the pressure attached to it. The emperor funded churches, summoned bishops, and wanted religious concord. He could protect Christian worship from hostile power because he now held that power himself. And yet, after years of Christian patronage, letters, laws, and intervention, Constantine had still not received baptism. That delay opens the deepest paradox in his story. Yet one fact still refuses to fit a simple conversion story. Constantine remained unbaptized until his final illness in 337. For modern viewers, that can look decisive. If baptism marks entry into Christian life, why would the first Christian emperor postpone it for roughly 25 years after the Milvian Bridge? 4th century practice complicates the suspicion. Many Christians understood baptism to wash away prior sins, while grave sin after baptism raised terrifying questions about repentance and restoration. Some believers therefore delayed the rite, especially when public office or military command seemed certain to require acts hard to reconcile with Christian discipline. That does not make delay universal, ideal, or spiritually harmless. It does make it historically intelligible. During his final illness near Nicomedia, Constantine asked for baptism. Eusebius describes him laying aside the imperial purple and receiving the rite before his death. The passage securely places baptism in his last illness. It does not give us the exact day, and it does not name the bishop who administered it. Other facts complicate any polished saint's portrait. Constantine kept inherited religious titles, and he presided over an empire where older cults continued. His reign also carried blood. Most painfully, the deaths of his son Crispus and his wife Fausta in 326. The sources do not let us reconstruct those events with confidence, but Christian patronage cannot erase them. Still, none of these facts functions as a perfect sincerity test. Retaining Pontifex Maximus does not prove secret paganism. Late baptism does not prove a 25-year fraud. Church building does not prove purity of heart. Violence does not become less grave because the ruler favored Christianity. History can weigh a trajectory more securely than a soul. So the test must change. Across the whole reign, did Constantine's choices become more specifically, consistently, and costly Christian? Or did the Christian language remain a thin decoration over unchanged rule? After 324, the answer becomes visible in scale. Constantine's patronage reached beyond local grants. Imperial resources supported major churches in Rome, in Jerusalem, and elsewhere. At the site Christians associated with the burial and resurrection of Christ, construction turned a corner of the empire's sacred geography into a monumental Christian center. Bishops received access to the ruler. Christian disputes reached his court. In 325, Constantine summoned bishops to Nicaea because division over the identity of the Son had become, in his eyes, a threat to the unity God required. The council did not choose the books of the Bible. It addressed a conflict over God, Christ, and worship. Constantine's role there belongs to the same pattern already visible in North Africa. Patronage, concern for unity, and imperial pressure moving together. Traditional religion did not disappear. Constantine did not outlaw every old cult, and his own language could still draw on Roman ideas of sacred victory and solar imagery. But the direction of imperial attention had shifted. Christianity received buildings, privileges, legal advocacy, money, and the emperor's personal involvement. By the end of his reign, the Christian God was no longer merely one possible patron invoked before battle. Constantine increasingly presented his rule inside a Christian account of providence. Was that politically useful? Certainly. Christian unity could serve imperial unity. Bishops could become partners in governing communities. A religion spread across the empire offered networks no ruler could ignore. Was it therefore insincere? That conclusion asks politics to cancel belief. Roman emperors had always understood religion and rule together. Constantine did not have to stop thinking politically in order to think Christianly. His Christianity developed through the habits of an emperor who believed heaven granted victory and expected divine favor to produce earthly order. That explains both the strength and the danger of his choice. He protected Christians because he increasingly aligned his reign with their God. He favored their institutions because conviction, gratitude, dynasty, and governance pulled in the same direction. And he entered their conflicts because an emperor who credited God for victory could imagine himself responsible for the peace of God's church. The precise inner balance shifted over time. We cannot measure it, but the direction is difficult to deny. Constantine's choice was not one clean moment beneath a blazing cross. It was a path, a sign before battle, a victory read as divine favor. Property restored, bishops funded, churches raised, disputes judged, unity demanded, and baptism received at the end of his life. That path does not give us a spotless Christian hero. It does not give us a pagan fraud wearing a cross for convenience. It gives us a Roman emperor whose Christian commitment became increasingly public and consequential, while ambition, violence, inherited religious forms, and the demands of power remained. The shields before Rome began the story. They did not finish it. For the Church, Constantine's support ended one danger and created another. Imperial protection gave Christians room to worship, to build, to teach, and to recover what persecution had taken. Proximity to the throne also tied Christian disputes to money, law, status, exile, and coercion. That is why Constantine still matters. Protection can relieve suffering without guaranteeing faithfulness. Political influence can widen a church's reach while quietly testing what it will trade for access, unity, and success. By 325, that test had reached the identity of Christ himself. Once an emperor treated church unity as an imperial concern, a dispute among bishops could summon the empire to Nicaea.